Hello and welcome to Newsclick. This is a joint program with Real News. The second part of your report, which is really focusing on certain excluded communities, you've taken 5 of them. Single women, taken also the issue of extreme tribally deprived groups like Jarvas. You've taken people who have been survivors of communal and ethnic violence. So can you walk us a little through the first part, which is single women, who in India you've also identified them as sort of very, this Hindu society, particularly Hindu society, is very uncomfortable with single women. So can you elaborate a little more on that?
Firstly, actually why the report has actually got these 2 different parts. Actually it's got a third around budgets as well, which is important. But you see, one is I think we should begin and look at exclusion from the perspective of particular public goods, like we did about health, water, sanitation. But I thought it's very important, it's still possible for us, even as somebody who is engaged and sympathetic, to forget the human cost of living with injustice. And for me, that part of the story, which is really about communities or categories of people who live with multiple denials and injustice and what it does to their lives. In one way it's like the first is looking through a telescope, the other is looking at it through the microscope, looking at exclusion as well. We look at the lived reality of people with multiple exclusion. So that is why we think that every report should have both. But single women was a particularly important category because I think that even when we talk about gender justice, it's a group that falls somewhat in the margins. Also, somewhat anecdotally, I spend a lot of time looking at hunger and deprivation and so on. I can, if I go into a village and I want to estimate who are the groups of people who would be most likely to be living with hunger and starvation. The social categories are there, which is of Dalit, tribal and Muslim. But within them also, where would I find it most? It is almost invariably with just 3 categories of people. One is old people without care. The second is families with anyone with disability. Even more so when the head of family is disabled, but also if even one single child or more is disabled. And the third is households headed by single women. There's a remarkable organization called the National Campaign, which has tried to organize single women as single women, the Ekal Nari Sangathan. And sometimes I've been the only male in the entire room of single women who have found a sisterhood, but also a celebration somewhere of their liberation from patriarchal oppression in a sense. And but singleness in society today derives from a strange anxiety that men generally, and patriarchal men, but also women, because women can also be patriarchal, but there's a strange anxiety of women who are independent of male control on support. So a woman, you will feel comfortable with a woman who is either a daughter or a sister or a wife or a mother, but a woman who by choice, even more by choice, but even by chance, I mean, if she's lost her husband to death, there's anxiety. She has to live in her singleness. But a woman who walks out of a marriage, or a woman who chooses to be single, cause even greater anxiety socially. And we look at them as people who threaten us because in some way they are not reliant on male support and control. Estimates about 8 to 10% actually of women are in some of these categories. And in any village you'll find that they struggle to find work, or they struggle to, and if they get into work, they're in very exploitative situations. They're continuously vulnerable to both sexual exploitation, but also people feel both that they're sexually available, but also look at them with suspicion because they are single. So what are they doing, and so on. I found in many situations, but also because I work with these two categories of homeless people and with survivors of communal violence. Let me talk about communal violence. There, the singleness is, your husband may have been killed in the violence, or you might have been single and widowed before. So where we build, say they build relief colonies or something like that, the women who are living without male partners are treated very, very badly by the relief agencies, by the state, and they are the ones who actually, logically or rationally, because of their social vulnerability, should be the ones who get the greatest support and solidarity. But they are the very ones who tend to be treated the most badly.
The last part, I would not go into all the sections that you have. The ethnic and communal violence, Muzaffarnagar and the Bodo districts. What are the major issues that you would like people to really realize, more than anything else, realization and then action? We seem to sort of have amnesia. Once it's happened, comes into the news and then goes away, and it sort of goes away from our consciousness. So what would you think are the major issues that you saw there and what needs to be addressed?
I think most importantly, that suffering doesn't go away. Exactly what you said. I mean, let's not go very far. In Delhi itself, if you had a Google map which sort of focused on human suffering, I'm quite sure that the densest location you'd probably go into is a place called Tilak Vihar, where there are about 700-800 widows from the 1984. It's 32 years now, 32nd year. I walk into that place and you start talking to the women, and the enormity of their suffering, but also the immediacy of that suffering, as if it didn't happen 32 years ago but yesterday, is something that has struck me over and over again. And we all move on, but the persons who have been hit, and it's very different from, I mean, if I lost my home and my family to an earthquake or to a tsunami, it causes suffering, but somewhere I can deal with it in one kind of way. But if the suffering and the loss has been caused because my neighbors hated me because of my religion and identity, it just is somehow a very different kind of wound, which is very difficult. And then when the state does not ensure any kind of justice. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about, because we have very limited time, but also because it's topical and maybe we could have another conversation, is this whole discussion in the same Muzaffarnagar Shamli area about the whole discussion today about people moving out, Hindus having to move out of one of the little kasbahs which are Muslim dominated. I mean, factually it's also not true. But it worries me enormously in terms of the nature of our public discourse, because I have seen that the most, if that had not happened and you ask me what was the most striking thing in the aftermath, it is that Muslim populations have had to leave mixed villages across Muzaffarnagar and Shamli, and they're forced to live for the first time in villages which are largely Muslim dominated. That should have caused, I mean, if they're worried about these movement of populations, why is nobody talking about addressing that and feeling badly that Muslims are not feeling secure enough? But so we have actually three kinds of categories very briefly in Muzaffarnagar, and that's something that we've talked about in the report as well. One is people who were directly hit by the violence, and there's no question of them going back. When I used to meet them in the camps and I used to say, why don't you go back? And they looked at me and they said, koi bulaye to hum jaएं. Nobody has come back to ask them to go back, which is, like, it's a sustained hatred which I've handled communal riots. I've not seen this happen before. This is really a newer development from Gujarat onwards, where I see that you don't want to hit them just at that point of time. You want it to be a permanent fracture. You don't want that fracture to heal, and so on. The second category is people who live in mixed villages around, which were not hit by the violence that time, but who got terrified now of living as minorities and have run away. Their situation is in some way even worse, because the state is unwilling to treat them as victims and so has extended to them no support. and they continue to live in camps for 2.5 years, and have been left to their own devices to actually raise money, take loans, and there's huge profiteering actually by the Muslim community.
Some in the Muslim community as well.
No, I mean, because this I've seen, that when you go into a Muslim dominated village, so then those prices have shot up, so you convert, so people look at that as an opportunity as well, because your religious identity is not, you also have class identities, you have caste identities, and they look down on these people. They're working class and they're poor, and they're usually low caste Muslims, and so people are taking advantage of it and they're selling it to them at profit. The other people have had some compensation, these people don't even have that. So I've seen that as a second category. There's the third category of people who have not made the move but are living as second class citizens in mixed villages.
Well, of course, as you know, the Kairana figures are all being
and then they're fictitious.
Yeah. And the so-called families who moved out, some of them have died, are still living there. So the whole thing, and Mr. Hukum Singh, who's raised this, we have him on camera sitting, Newsclick has him on camera sitting down in meetings where most incendiary speeches have been made.
Yeah.
And Mr. Sangeet Som, Mr. Rana, all of them who are now active stirring the communal pot, were all on camera that Newsclick did at the time of elections.
But I'm saying that even if they had left, I'm saying that should, it should be an anxiety when any community is forced to leave, and they weren't even forced to leave. But I mean, it's just the nature of the communalization of our dominant public discourse is
changed. Yeah. But this is, in fact, this is the slow change that has taken place with Babri Masjid, where communalism came out, as I say, out of the closet. It became then, it became respectable to make communal statements and speeches, which you earlier could not do in public life or even private life in India, except in a very close circuit. This is all we have time today for Newsclick. Please keep watching Newsclick for other episodes.